summarized the committee meeting well. I know a couple of people came in while you were talking. In addition, we have Mike. You want to introduce yourself?
Mike Reardon. I'm with the City of St. Paul, but I'm wearing the hat more today as the president of Minnesota Association of Community Telecommunications Administrators, MACTA.
Okay.
And I'm also on the League of Minnesota Cities Telecom Task Force.
Great.
Then from the State House here, we have Bob. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Bob Eliff. I work for the House Research Department, and I staff Representative Johnson's committee.
So any legislation that will be put together as we talked this morning and in the next few days or weeks, whatever, Bob will be writing up. So he's here to kind of give some guidance on that and listen to what thoughts are on it. I think you summarized the committee input correctly in as much as I think there is bipartisan support and interest in this whole issue of broadband development throughout the state, universal access, and making sure speeds are such that people can utilize some of the services that have been built, whether it's state services or telemedicine or education and so forth. The one caveat perhaps is it's a new committee, and a lot of the members, I think, as a lot of people who are become first acquainted with the whole issue of telecommunications, have a learning curve to go through, and I think it's important to help move that along and educate members about what the different issues are. And they haven't all got the task force report, and they have all been given that email now, and we'll have a chance to go through that over the next few weeks. What I would like to do as the chair of the regulated industries, which for this particular committee that I chair entails telecommunications, is put together a bill based on the work that you've done as a task force and looking at the recommendations in particular. I want to say thank you, first of all, to the task force, because for all the work we've done, it's been essentially, best I can tell, a volunteer group, and putting in your own time and energy on something like this is great. But I think now it is time to take the next step forward and make it part of the government's work or government's agency, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's more or less what the governor's office has recommended as well, as far as funding the broadband development office. I think it is time to actually give some formal recognition and pay some people to actually do some ongoing work on these important issues because they're so vital to the state. So I think that is a realistic and good recommendation. If you don't mind, I'll just say a few things about the task force recs and what I think makes sense. Frankly, we're in a huge deficit situation, so things that cost money are probably a lot of money anyway, are less likely this biennium to move forward. So I think to take a measured approach where we're looking at leveraging the resources we have, or can have, and in any event, if we put a broadband development office together, to utilize and work at trying to find some of the money and resources that are out there through, whether it's CAF funding or whatever the case may be, to bring that money into the state to continue working on that, on the last mile issues and the speed goals and that we have set forth in statute. So I think, looking at the recommendations, I think a broadband development office where we can coordinate some of these projects. Certainly the fiber collaboration database, Big Ones program, it seems pretty common sense oriented and something that certainly we should do. The concerns that I have, is measurable results. How are we going to know for sure where we're moving the needle forward towards the broadband goals? That's always going to be the trick. But I think in terms of starting, I think this is a good start, and what I want to do, obviously, is work in collaboration with the task force to get, I think what we put in legislation is a combination of what I'm talking about here, what you folks think makes most sense, which you're the experts that have been working on it for the last year, to move that needle ahead in terms of broadband goals before speeds and access. I'm generally less concerned about adoption rates, mainly because the way I look at it, I think the importance and need that people are seeing with respect to broadband, whether it's again telemedicine or education or utilizing government services, is so huge and important and so necessary that I think making sure we have the access and speeds is for me the most important, because I think people will adopt. And we look at the iPad and what that has done in terms of people figuring out how to use that particular resource and access the broadband network. So anyway, those are some of the comments I have as I look at the work that's been done. I'm so appreciative of the fact that so many people put in so much time to get to this point, but I don't think we can drop the ball now. We need to move forward, and I think a good start is putting together a broadband development office and do those things which don't cost a whole lot of money but make a lot of sense to further the state's goals. So those are my comments, Madam Chair, right now.
Representative Johnson, do you think that there is interest in introducing all of the recommendations in some format, even though some of them have a harder hurdle to climb over, which is some of them are more expensive than others? Or do you foresee putting one piece of legislation together that will encompass all of this, or maybe something that does the tax side of it and or incentive side and other things that take care of the policy side?
That's a good question. I've thought about that. I'm open, I guess, to suggestions in that regard, the extent to which how hard people want to work to promote that as an idea. I'm certainly willing to introduce it in that fashion. I don't know what people think and the kind of energy they want to push to make that happen, or have that as part of the program. I think those particular ideas, the tax credit to incent broadband providers and the sales tax exemption, are excellent and probably do more in terms of meeting the goals than the others. Realistically, is there an appetite in terms of the budget? I'm not sure, but it might make sense in terms of discussion to get the ideas out there. So I'm willing to listen to what the task force thinks on that. Basically, I want to work in collaboration with the work that you folks have done.
Thank you. Representative Johnson, from our days in the legislature together, we know that sometimes ideas take a while to actually mature into the action that's needed. So I think if there's probably some argument, doesn't necessarily have to be all together, but for pieces of this to be introduced this year, even though we know that some of it's got a little higher hurdle to climb over, get some discussion pieces out, and also shows there's not just one or two things that need to be done. Do other people have comments, questions, ideas? Now, let's all not be silent now. Really?
No, I mean, I like, I'm glad to hear, Representative Johnson, that, you're open and the committee's open to working with us, because I think there's a lot, we've laid a foundation, I'll say, and I think there's a lot of things we can do moving forward. We've even talked in I run the adoption or lead the adoption subgroup, so I think I'm interested in hearing more about, I think we've heard from people last year that said, like, from a growth perspective, slowly adopt, that need to adopt, or if they find something of value. But then through informal conversations with family members, what people really want to do and send email to their grandchildren, children, and I would say if they're in the family gathering and they're in the, let's say the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, they just don't. They want to, but they're like, oh, I'm getting that hurdle. So I think there is kind of an untapped, narrow group that I would look at saying, how do you help them adopt? They want to, so it's not like they're against it, something like that. And then we talked about doing some more partnering with Vang, or Bao within her group, and maybe there's some things she can bring back to us from the Hmong partnership and other minority groups that we think are low adoption rates. So that was one area I think of are there narrow areas for certain demographics that we focus on from an adoption perspective?
Okay, fair enough.
Senator Sparks, welcome.
Thank you.
We-
Sorry we're a little late.
No, that's okay. It's a little challenging to, it's a long hallway and security. To add on to what Shirley just talked about with adoption, one of the things that we did talk about a little bit when I was before Representative Johnson's committee, and I'm going to be before your committee tomorrow, Senator Sparks, is the need for awareness or better coordination, especially in the area of workforce, around job applications. So this is an area where we know that the surveys say people are fairly comfortable turning on their computer, basic sort of things, but they don't really understand what it's going to take to get a job application done online. And so we didn't totally get to that part. That's something that I think we need to explore more in our work this year is it's both adoption, but it's also got some opportunity. I know we did talk about this with some members of your committee who serve on both Workforce Development Committee and your committee as well, that there may be some places to work together more closely. One of the issues being that mobile, as we've been exploring the mobile adoption rate is pretty good, especially among minority groups. It's actually fairly high and robust. But the problem is a 3x5 screen, it's probably impossible to do a job application or nearly impossible to do a job application. And so finding ways to help people connect to both the skills and training they need to learn how to do these things, but then also the basic access and speed in a format that is going to work. So that's one place of adoption that we think. Education seems to be driving a lot of adoption. Healthcare will continue, and we actually have recommendations about finding federal dollars to help people connect. But this issue of the individual and the ability to access a job, I think, is really, really critical, and probably a place that we have not spent even as much time as we could spend on it. So it might be a right place for exploration by the committees as well.
One thing I wasn't clear on, in the report, is the extent to which 4G and LTE can actually meet the broadband goals, or to what extent they can push things forward. Do you have any, or does anyone have any thoughts on?
So our expert on that, Bob Bass from AT&T, was relocated out of state. We talked about this a little bit. And I think that we have only just begun to explore as a task force the consideration if mobile meets the goals or not. And
yeah, and I think some of the research that we initially did and the speeds that we got, I'm not sure if it does now, but like it's shortly, but we don't have a time frame as to when that would meet. But I think, what we heard and what we've seen from a trend perspective, I think I defer to some of our wireless experts and legal experts there, but from what I've seen on the diagrams and trends, it will.
And that's one of the benefits of an office of broadband, to coordinate this sort of work both around funding as well as, we talked about specifically a modeler, someone who can model out predictions of, if we do this policy intervention, then we're going to leap this far ahead. If the trend with mobile is in this period of months, we're going to gain this sort of speed. That's important stuff that right now, we don't really have the capacity to do.
And certainly one of the themes on the report was that we need help from the government or to really push things along or move things along. Otherwise, things are just going to not get taken care of. Is that true? I mean, is that a major theme?
The natural pace that we're moving at will not get us to the broadband goal of border-to-border broadband by 2015. And so I think that there was agreement among providers, among the public sector, among the private sector, that strategic interventions that can speed the rate of getting to people who are not connected to be able to increase that speed are going to be important to meet the goal. If we want to meet the goal, we're not going to get there without some further intervention.
And these are pretty strategic interventions, I think, that are recommended in the task force report. I mean, they're not, they're pretty, the word is mild or moderate, they're not over the top kind of public engagement. And I think it's realistic for the time and the budget that we have before the state government right now. I think it's reasonable.
Senator Sparks, thank you for joining us.